Okay, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. Some sad news for you. Some of you may know that last week, Ed Gallo was on the show. Phil McKenzie's back, by the way, Phil.
Hey!
1 year older. Another year closer to death. Thank God. So Ed was on the show last week, Phil. I know you listen to every episode, right?
Yeah, let's say that I do.
Yeah, so you're already aware of the fact that Ed Gallo, who kept pulling out his cell phone during the recording and calling his friend Ben Cohn. It's like they were like scheming together. I don't know. That was very strange. And he kept explicitly talking about the fact that they were doing this too. It's like he thinks it's funny to joke about this sort of thing. And basically, like, he used all of the power at his disposal to, which is a lot. I mean, he's a wrestler. He's got farm strength. And he basically, like, twisted my arm and made me pick Justin Geichi over Khabib Nurmagomedov, whom, as we now know, and of course at the time I already suspected, is the greatest fighter of all time. So really, like, you were fortunate, not to be on the show last week and not to be subjected to that sort of, malign influence. Yeah,
I mean, on the one hand, I would like to take this moment to mock you for being a weak-minded fool.
Yeah.
I would never do anything like that. I would never allow myself to be influenced in that kind of way.
Uh-huh.
And, fortunately, I'm going to pretend that I picked, Khabib. Sorry, I'm going to, remind everyone that I picked Khabib Nurmagomedov.
That's right.
And there's no documented evidence like a, written toe-to-toe preview of me picking, Justin Geichi in this fight. So all I can do is laugh at what idiots you and Ed were.
Well, Ed's not the idiot. I mean, I'm the idiot. Ed was the mastermind, really. I mean, I think he knew exactly what he was doing.
Just discrediting the show from within.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, they know that their Patreon is only gonna pick up, the Fight Site Patreon's only gonna pick up if, the strongest fundraising operation in mixed martial arts journalism, could take a serious hit. So, yeah, mission accomplished. But fortunately, we now have Phil McKenzie back on the show. We are talking about Khabib versus Geichi. It was yet another one of those overperforming cards, which it didn't need to be, because the fights at the top were, and really just the fight at the top was compelling enough that the UFC knew they could afford to understack this one, which they did, yet it over-delivered. Entertaining night of fights pretty much from start to finish, only a couple lulls that I can recall. But I think we're mostly going to stick to the fights that Ed and I talked about last week, if that's all right, which means Khabib versus Geichi, of course, Whitaker versus Cannoneer, which, Phil, I'll let you know. Ed was, I think, probably the only member of the Fight Site team of the Vaping Scooter Gang who was, like, level-headed enough to realize that this is the kind of matchup Robert Whitaker always wins. So we did both pick Bobby Knuckles, which it was good to feel vindication on that one. And I think we'll also, I guess, talk about Ankalaev Kudalaba, which was at least very funny. Not as funny as the first fight, but as far as sequels go, I've certainly seen worse. Ghostbusters 2 is a hell of a lot worse than Ankalaev Kudalaba 2. And then, Casey Kenny, Nathaniel Wood. I think that's mostly what we're going to cover before we take what will likely be, by the time we get to it, a relatively short look at next week's Uriah Hall versus Anderson Silva, which I have many feelings about, and most of them I'm not willing to acknowledge, and I don't know how to address them. So we'll get to that, and probably Andre Feely versus Bryce Mitchell, maybe one other fight from that card as well. Kevin Holland is fighting, so we're going to have to at least mention him. But Phil, since I didn't get it from you last week, why don't we start off with your thoughts on Khabib versus Geichi? First of all, what were your expectations? And I may pop in here and there to interject with things that the brilliant Ed Gallo brought up in our conversation. But, yeah, what was your expectations and what surprised you about how it played out?
So I think probably expectations were that Geichi would be giving up takedowns, but would be able to scramble out of them.
Mm-hmm.
They would be he would be holding the center, and would be able to essentially shut down the initial shot, because he has generally been pretty good at that. He's very aggressively focused on takedowns, which I think we saw a bit of a it was both good and bad in this fight, because and that was something I was wondering about, is that Khabib, he always sets up his initial shot with a sort of diving for the single leg with like a relatively soft, weak shot. He just wants to get his hands on you without having to drive into it, and then he just pushes you into the fence. But you're already at the fence by the time he makes the shot. You know, it's not a GSP cause shake double leg type thing.
No.
I was like, on the one hand, HG is going to be able to, like, he will attack these initial shots as they're coming in, like, very hard. And he did do that. On the other hand, I was thinking, this may also get him extremely tired. I guess what I didn't see coming was that Geichi would, heavily overreact to takedowns when they were coming in. He was clearly very cognizant of the idea that Khabib was going to level change on him. Like, there was some straight up flailing in the early going of this.
Yeah, I think that's unavoidable, honestly. Like, Khabib just has that effect on people, and he leverages that effect better than basically any other fighter. It's like the oldest principle in MMA is the wrestle boxer switch up, but Khabib really, really like embodies that. Which of these two very threatening things is this guy gonna do feeling?
Yeah. So I think, that was the other thing. Like, it reminded me a bit of Costa, against Adesanya. Not necessarily in quite the same way, but like, would have asked me beforehand and I would have said, I think this guy can be shook, but I think Geichi kind of was shook.
I think it was a far more credible performance than Costa gave. Like, it
was just that, like, wouldn't have thought I could see Geichi fight nervous, but I think he genuinely did.
Yeah.
I think in terms of in terms of the early going, he tried to sort of tried to pressure Khabib a bit. I think he just, even sort of the threat of the takedown kept him, he was just like, he feinted a few times at Khabib, and then Khabib just sort of feinted him back, and he was like, oh, okay, let's go on the back foot. Like, there was a lot of the early cagecraft, not cagecraft, a lot of the early exchanges that we saw were strikeless. They were just about determining, like, the direction of the fight between the two. And Geichi was just like, oh, I would like to go forward in this fight. And then Khabib started feinting, and then Geichi was just like, no, I don't think I will.
Yeah, we've seen this in a lot of Khabib fights. There is a switch that turns when he decides he's pressuring now. This was maybe the most intense version of that I've ever seen. Although, having said that, I'm now recalling, like, the Edson Barboza fight. Yeah. And I remember, like, round 2 of that fight when Barboza was just running away. Khabib was literally running forwards, just throwing both hands, throwing kicks, jabbing, flying knees, everything. So yeah, he did the thing where he, like, starts for, like, a minute and a half, just kind of sees what the other guy wants to do, and then starts coming forward. Relentlessly. Absolutely relentlessly. I'm there's so many different angles from which to attack this. Like, first of all, let me say, like, what a performance from Khabib. Yeah. Like, we talked, Ed and I talked last week about this being like a career and era defining performance. I think a lot of people felt that way, that this would be the culmination of one of the most incredible runs in both lightweight and just overall MMA history. And, yep. The man's pound for pound number one. I'm not going to say shit about GOAT. I don't think you should be really having those conversations the moment a fighter retires. But, it certainly puts him in the conversation. And it, in my mind, makes him unquestionably the number one fighter in the world for as long as, he retains that ranking until their retirement expunges him. So.
I mean, he's, there's always been debates over who is the, lightweight GOAT. And now it is completely unquestioned. And yeah, I've been sort of coming at this from a critical angle because it's from the perspective, things I expected to see and didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not a sort of perfect shutout kind of performance in, a Silver Laban or a Silver Franklin or a Gregor Alvarez or something. This is still one of the best title fight champion performances that I've ever seen in MMA.
Yeah, and how the hell do you shut out Justin Geichi? How are you supposed to do that anyway? You know what I mean? It's not like Rich Frank. He doesn't have an off switch. If things are going bad, he's going to fight really, really hard, which even in this fight, he was forced to do. And he landed plenty of big shots, really big shots on Khabib, but it just didn't make a difference. It didn't have one ounce of impact on the momentum and direction of the fight. So, all right. So I'm thinking I'm going to rehash a lot of what we said last week, and by we I mean mostly Ed because he was the one bringing all the insight, and me just being yeah. So the first thing I want to say is, I think I recall saying last week. I recall, in fact, paraphrasing what I believe is originally a Phil McKenzie quote. I think you said this back when we talked about, Pettis versus Barboza. And this may be I can't remember. It may actually be more recently we talked about it. And, you basically summed up the thought process that went into at least my pick in that fight you summed it up by saying, at a certain point, good footwork is good footwork. Cause you can look at a lot of Pettis matchups and be you gotta push this guy backwards. Jim Miller should have been pushing Anthony Pettis backwards, for example, in their fight. But the truth is, whether you're pressuring him or not, there's a certain level of just technical skill and moving your feet, at which you surpass Pettis' ability to outmaneuver you. So whether you're moving backwards or forwards, and we saw that when Edson Barboza fought him, he didn't need to pressure at all. He just jabbed him up, and didn't allow Pettis to set up in front of him. And I think I said last week to Ed, maybe that is the case here. We both expected Geichi to pressure, which it sounds like you did as well. Although I think all of us are underrating what it feels like to fight Khabib and what it feels like to, in the moment, persuade yourself to continue taking steps forward, into, potentially wrestling and grappling exchanges, even if that just means the clinch. But I think it was shown resoundingly clear that, no, footwork isn't just footwork, against Khabib. I'm more convinced than ever, you have to push this man back 100%, to beat him if you allow him to continue pressing forward. But I think the reason for that is that, Khabib is he's just fucking brilliant. This is something that Zane, that son of a bitch, but Zane said this on the Vivi last week, that Khabib's fights all end up in the same place, the same positions with the same things happening. And so it's all too easy to say oh, this is just the Khabib game. But, he said very strongly that one of Khabib's greatest strengths is his ability to prepare specifically for his opponents. And in Zane's conception, this was a major reason why he looked so flat against Ally Quinta.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, and this fight, if I wasn't completely sold on that before, and the main reason I say that, there are lots of strategic, choices Khabib made in this fight that were specifically tailored to what Geichi was doing. For example, he did a great job of, using the takedown threat to force Geichi backwards and at angles, and then getting to land easy, like sweeping, circular, corralling strikes. He had a lot of those in this fight to capitalize on the fact that, it's like he watched the video in which Geichi said, I have to keep my back off the fence. And he was like, all right, I'm going to make you do that. I'm going to make you keep your back off the fence, and I'm going to hit you while you're doing it. But the main thing was that last week, Ed specifically called out one of the takedowns Luis Firmino hits in his fight with Justin Geichi. It is a double leg with a quick corner turn that finishes the shot. And he said, and I agreed with him, that's not what Khabib does. As you said at the beginning of your analysis, he grabs the single, uses that as like a staging position to control you and usually just put you against the fence, and that's where the takedown really begins. Both of the takedowns he hit in this fight were angle change double legs. So, like, I can't think of any stronger evidence that Khabib, probably himself personally, watched tape on Justin Geichi and came away with exactly the right technical adjustments to catch him off guard and actually make sure he got him down in a controlled position whenever he did get him to the ground. Like, that's not part of the Khabib arsenal. And it was both of the paths to the ground in this fight. I don't know. My mind was blown by that. Whenever analysis is like this, right? Like, we have to go off of what we've seen before. But the reason is that it frequently works is that usually that stuff is predictive. So when somebody just flatly contradicts, an expectation that their own footage has set, I'm always immensely impressed. But, Khabib does that with like one new little tactical wrinkle or whatever each and every fight. So anyway, sorry, I've been rambling.
Yeah, so that's why I think it's one of the most impressive performances, like, because it's like a bit like McGregor Diaz too.
Yes,
the importance is not in, it wasn't a clean fight at all. It was one where there were a bunch of specific questions being posed of McGregor, and he answered them in the ways which fighters very rarely do.
Mm-hmm.
That you say, okay, this fighter might be able to do X, Y, Z, but they never do it. And we never see, like you said, we never see people pull out contextual changes to their game plan that are just the right one that they need for the guy in front of them, because that's incredibly difficult to do.
Yeah.
So, I think we saw a lot of that in this fight. I don't think anyone would have said, I think there's three major elements to it.
Mm-hmm.
That we saw that have changed for Khabib. Like, did anyone have predicted he would have been that aggressive with his stand?
No,
that seems like is suicidal.
He treated Geichi exactly the way he treated Edson Barboza. Let me say that again. Remember what Geichi did to Edson Barboza when they went firepower against firepower? Anyway, go on.
And it worked because, yes, every time he threw a strike, Geichi was just like, is this a takedown? And it just wasn't until the end of until the end of the first round. And I think, in between the rounds, when Whitman was talking to Geichi, he said, you've got to land however many it is. You need 8 leg kicks to take this guy out. And you could see Geichi was trying to look for them more and more throughout that second round, because he was just like, got to get my win condition there before this guy just get this guy off me.
Mm-hmm.
I have to, like, he was throwing more, he started throwing them. He was like, oh no, they're working. I have to keep doing them. But yeah, I think so. Firstly, Khabib just leaning on what was presumably his area of weakness, and sort of, I think, basically kind of breaking Geichi a bit mentally with that, just by refusing to get off him with the strikes. Secondly, like you said, it was the takedowns. Like the way he threw the takedowns, like he has not thrown counter double legs to to low kicks before. We've mentioned before, like, with people that throw weak shots, like, you know, like Damian Maia.
Mm-hmm.
Rory McDonald kind of solved that a little bit because he was like, oh yeah, like normally against a takedown threat, you can't kick them safely.
Mm-hmm.
Against this guy, it's not really any different from any of his other takedown entries. You know, you're not getting blown off your feet because he's not driving through.
Mm-hmm.
Just fight the takedown as you would normally. So you can, you know, it allowed him a lot of kicking offense. So we saw the counter to the low kicks from Khabib, which he'd never shown before.
Mm-hmm.
Lastly, like, I think people were ready for Khabib to have. I mean, what's Khabib famous for on the ground?
Right. Yeah.
Steadily breaking people down over time. He's not famous for almost instantly finishing fights with aggressive, like top to bottom side submissions.
Yeah.
The 2 times he gets takedowns.
Like Chris Lytle, Brian Ortega, like action grappler level of urgency to get to the submission. Instantaneously after getting to the ground, he was working on the submission. Both times.
I mean, we've mentioned before that, like, you know, you could tell, even though no one ever took him down, Khabib's game off his bat looked like it was probably incredibly legit. I mean, it's basically just that triangle against Stable Trujillo.
Trujillo. But that triangle against Trujillo is like the minute and a half of like top mount we get from Aldo in like the Hominic fight or whatever. You know what I mean? It's enough to be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
They really know what they're doing in this position.
You're like, damn, that was fast and it was locked on and you are saved by the bell.
Or to a lesser degree, like Robert Whitaker against Uriah Hall, which is a sequence I constantly mention as reason to praise his grappling ability.
Mm-hmm.
You can just see he just knows what he's doing. He's very smooth, looks very practiced, very professional. But this was like 8 stages beyond that. Like, so what do you think was the thought process there for that? Because it was very clearly a specific adaptation. Like, it's not what Khabib does on the ground. He got him down. He hit. First of all, like I said, Geichi sprawled beautifully. Like, he did what Rory McDonald did to Damian Maia. It's not like it was an incredible shot, the one that set up the finish. But Khabib clearly saw the fight in which that angle change really worked on Geichi and did that. Got around to his back. The back take was instantaneous and one of the most incredible pieces of grappling I had ever seen, up until the point I saw that immediately lead to an S mount to armbar to triangle finish. From top position transitioning to the bottom. What do you think was the thought process that made that a specific adaptation for Geichi?
You mean for Khabib?
Right.
I mean, I think, honestly, he'd probably just practiced a lot of takedown techniques to low kicks.
But I mean the quick transition to like the incredibly aggressive submissions.
I mean, I think in the first round, he was just like, the clock was ticking.
Mm-hmm.
It was against him. He only got the takedown really late. And he was like, let's see if I can just aggressively go for a sub, towards the end of this round. And then I think he was literally just like, oh, I can do that on this guy.
Yeah. I almost wonder if some people were theorizing that his foot injury, which he's been posting pictures of. I mean, I tend to believe he actually had it in the fight, but you never know with these things. Some people were theorizing that maybe encouraged him to want to go for a super quick finish. There is maybe the idea as well that he, wanted to push the finish early because Geichi is so well known for recovering his stamina. And dealing continued attritional damage, certainly better attritional damage than Khabib would have been able to give him over the course of 5 rounds, because Khabib he's not a low kicker or a body puncher to the level that Geichi is. But I also think that maybe Khabib maybe he just saw that Justin's BJJ wasn't really shit.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm honest, I think he watched that Firmino fight and he was like, oh, this guy uses his wrestling scrambles to avoid jiu-jitsu. And that's his approach to the ground game. I'm going to make him play jiu-jitsu. I'm going to mount him and make him defend chained submissions. I think that was a specific, Geichi does not know how to deal with this particular kind of pressure. He doesn't have any kind of instinctive response. And I think that's what he was thinking. And I think if he was, it appears that he was correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most, like, because the changes that Khabib made weren't just smart. I think they're incredibly brave.
Yes.
Like, because it's one thing to just say, do the takedowns that you don't ever do, and just go and strike with this guy and push him backwards and just jump on bottom side, like, just give up dominant positions to jump for submissions. Like, to do all three of those things, I mean, that is one of the most, like, gutsy performances I think I've seen against someone as obviously scary and physical and everything else that Justin gave.
Yeah, I mean, like, we saw how Tony Ferguson reacted to getting hit by Justin Geichi. Like, as continuous as the action was in that fight, it was probably the most reticent, anxious, visibly anxious Tony Ferguson we've ever seen. Unsure of the distance, hesitating as he threw, like, even at points already in the second round, Ferguson had been hit hard and was second guessing his strikes. Like, no, this was, yeah, I don't know. It's not like Geichi wasn't hitting Khabib, you know? He hit him with huge low kicks. He hit him with that body uppercut to left hook combination of his that I love. Both shots landed clean. Nope. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like, a huge part of how I think the credit Khabib deserves for this is the fact that, like, all of these strategic decisions were kind of gambits. That they were calculated risks. And for whatever reason, that's been a topic that's been coming up frequently on the show lately. But obviously the picking and choosing of moments to accept a calculated risk is a huge part of success in fighting. Everything is a calculated risk if you really think about it. And, that's like that. I can't disagree with Zane in saying that is a key element of Khabib's genius, as a great fighter, is like, he just understands where the weaknesses of his opponents are. And again, I think you couldn't have asked for better proof of that, than this fight, that's not even just his father. That clearly he has incorporated that shit from his father and internalized it and made it part of his own thought process regarding fights. That he himself, unlike so many fighters whose coaches do all this work for preparation, I think Khabib himself understands. Like, even the Ally Quinta fight, you know, like, he wasn't prepared. It was not his usual A game, but, like, he did 100% correctly identify as that fight went on that Ally Quinta did not have the footwork to stop him outmaneuvering and jabbing him up. That was a brilliant read. It's exactly what you do to beat Ally Quinta. If you're not grappling him, if you have to strike, that's how everyone who beats him on the feet beats him. And Khabib, I think he figured that out on the fly. I think, I don't know, an incredible performance. Like, if the retirement does stick, and I kind of tend to think it will, then, it's about as good a way as you can possibly go out of this, shit-awful sport. Maybe that has something to do with the, Kadyrov money lining Khabib's vault, that he can afford to do that. But in this case, and I will probably never say this again regarding people like Kadyrov, I say, good for him. And he gets to keep that good for him for up to 24 hours before he must exchange it.
I mean, there's many complicated things to say about people and their people in MMA and their relationship with, bad people. But one quite cynical approach is obviously the Clay Davis one, which is, I'll take anyone's money if he's giving it away.
Yes.
But yeah, he has a pretty complicated legacy behind him, but undoubtedly, like, you know, as I said, the greatest, undoubtedly now the greatest fighter in historically the best division in MMA. And I think, you know, if he does, never come back and like you. I mean, I'd kind of like to see it stick, just because it seems like family is important to him, and I wouldn't want to see him kind of coming back and jeopardizing all of that for another crack at this awful sport.
At the very least, it would feel kind of, now that he has said in front of a massive audience, I promised my mother. Like, at the very least, it would not feel good to see him come back.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's kind of intriguingly, you know, he still leaves as this unanswered question, as this mystery.
Yeah.
I think that's fine for me. I mean, especially for me, I'm sort of someone who's picked against him a lot. That I just have to admit, you know, I never understood Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Right?
I never really got him. And
he doesn't let you. He doesn't let you get him. You only get what he allows you to see. He's just so well directed and aggressive and insane and confident. Yeah, I mean,
it's like, you know, some like TV series or books don't have these kind of ambiguous endings where you're not sure about what, you know, who the person was. All you can really say about Khabib is that he was an incredibly great fighter.
Yes.
And other than that, yeah, I just have to say, like, I never understood him, and it's kind of, in a weird way, it's gratifying that you can still have this sport which is like that, where you can just have this guy, you know, have this incredible career and just leave it, and then think, man, at no point did I have like a particularly great handle on this guy's like potential and skill set, and in many ways, I sort of feel like I still don't.
Right. I compared him last week I compared fighting Khabib to fighting the Roman Empire, where Rome can afford to lose 12 battles and it doesn't make a fucking difference. And I think I compared Geichi to Boudica. If you're Boudica, you can only afford to lose one big battle and it's over. And I do think in retrospect, Boudica was a better comparison than others I could have made, like say Hannibal. 'Cause he was not at any moment fighting even a winning war. But that's kind of the story of every Khabib fight. Like, he really does give you, as close as MMA comes to, like, a great conqueror sort of vibe. Where it's like, this is just a guy who, in retrospect, feels like comes out of nowhere, and just no one ever figures him out. Except for Gleison Tebow. But truly, not to disparage the man's accomplishments. Like, yeah, no one ever figured him out. Even Tebow didn't figure him out. He just was lucky enough to be a big, dumb enough brute to not get overpowered by him. But, Khabib.
Fight him pretty early in his UFC run.
Yes, exactly. Khabib actively made himself more mystifying and, clever over the course of his UFC career. He was continually getting better. Incredible. I mean, it was an incredible run. And yeah, I would like to see him retired, and I feel perfectly, I love stories with ambiguous endings, Phil. So I'm perfectly happy to be left with this, to me, what is a very satisfying, lingering mystery of, how do you beat this dude? Really? What does it look like when somebody beats Khabib? Really? When someone actually takes a fight from him? Because even the Tebow fight doesn't come close to that kind of feeling. And yeah, I don't know, and I'm happy not to know what it looks like, because that is a testament to how fucking good this guy was.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's take our break then. It's been nearly 37 minutes. So we're going to try not to spend too much time just gushing over and praising Robert Whitaker's win over Jared Cannoneer, touch on a couple other fights from this 254 card before moving on to next week's Hall versus Silva, Feely versus Mitchell, and more, maybe, after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution, No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about the co-main event now of UFC 254. We'll try not to take too much time on this. But I do want to say, now that he has also joined the land of the no longer living, poor Ed Gallo, he'll be missed. He was dead wrong, truly dead wrong about the Khabib Geichi fight. But at least he was, I think, the only person from his entire cadre of emotional orphans. The only one, because all of them, like us, Phil, they love Bobby Knuckles. I think he was the only one who didn't sadness hedge. And I'm going to say that confidently, even though I haven't checked. And fortunately, he and I both resisted the sadness hedge. And the way this fight played out, I now feel very confident that I feel very confident in my read about on Robert Whitaker. Like, compiling this as like a control against what I thought I had learned from the Adesanya and Till fights. I now feel like I have a pretty complete picture of who this guy is as a fighter, which is why I want to start this breakdown of Whitaker's dominant, beautiful performance over Jared Cannoneer by saying that I do not want him to fight Israel Adesanya again, because this fight really cements my notion that Whitaker looks fucking awesome when he can fight a guy with slow feet that don't move very much. Mm-hmm. And it's beautiful watching Whitaker be the technician. But when Whitaker doesn't get to be the technician, he runs into trouble. This fight really like cemented that for me. I don't know. How did you feel about it? I don't want to undercut it. Great performance. Loved it. But
yeah, pretty much the same kind of read for me, both, going in and, like actually watching the fight.
You also picked Bobby?
What's that?
You also picked Bobby?
Yes, I did.
Good for you.
Because the main thing people were saying is that, like, Cannoneer is a physical force, and that is true. Mm-hmm. But is he as much of a physical force as Yoel Romero?
Yeah.
Over 3 rounds. And the answer is no. Definitely
not.
Or at least, and that's just the thing that Whitaker puts out there. You're not going to beat him with just athleticism. It has to be more than that. And
I think people underrate the amount of sheer toughness Yoel Romero required to arguably beat, to do whatever he did in the 2 fights with Whitaker. Like the insane durability required. Cause Cannoneer is not a fragile guy. And by the end of this fight, Whitaker was fucking him up.
Yeah, and I think Cannoneer kind of compared unfavorably to Yoel Romero in that way. Like you said, he's just a pretty foot-slow guy who will let you do stuff you want to do to him, to at least some extent.
Mm-hmm.
And he did have a game plan in mind, but it was a pretty limited one. And that
low kicks?
When Whitaker punched in, Cannoneer was going to try and catch the moment when he was braced on his lead leg and low kick him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to do that a few times. But, it wasn't enough. And Whitaker was just able to feint his entries out enough. And that Cannoneer just found himself guessing on the jab too much.
Yeah, I mean, he also got away with the thing that got him in trouble against Adesanya, which is he could continue the attack. He would press the exchange after the moment that Cannoneer thought the exchange had finished. So, like, there were tons of examples of Cannoneer landing the low kick as that first jab extends. And then, I don't know, about 60-70% of the time that happened, there would be at least one, usually 2 or 3 more jabs following instantly on the heels of that exchange. That it's like, well, now we've had the exchange. You're committed to the attack you just made. You're not in a good position to respond to any other strikes. I'm going to continue keeping hand traffic in your face. Yeah, and this was exactly the tendency that got him in trouble against Adesanya, that just had him leaping into counters over and over against Cannoneer, as it was against Jacare Souza, and I don't know who else is like the classic Robert Whitaker win. Well, Yoel Romero.
What's his face? Brad Tavares.
Tavares? Yeah. Yeah, it was just way more effective. That he was able to just continually exploit those opportunities after the initial contact. You know what I could not stop paying attention to throughout this fight? Was, Daniel Cormier's commentary. And I just want to use this I'm going to use Cormier as a surrogate for any people out there who are adjusting their opinions of Whitaker going forward, who are perhaps even now reevaluating, their image of an Adesanya rematch based on this. I want to use Cormier as a surrogate to respond to those thoughts. Cormier was continually saying stuff like, well, first of all, he praised Jared Cannoneer for believing in the secret and thoughts manifesting in reality, which was very funny. He said something along the lines of, I spoke to Jared Cannoneer before the fight, and I said, you got jabbed up by, Jan Blachowicz. Dominic Reyes countered you. How are you going to deal with the possibility of Robert Whitaker trying to do something like that? And Cannoneer said to me, I don't even want to think about it, man. I don't want to manifest it into existence. And this shows the mental maturity of Jared Cannoneer. That was very funny. But also, aside from Cannoneer's magical thinking, Cormier's own magical thinking was that Robert Whitaker had learned from his Adesanya experience, and these were the fruits of that. That this was a more experienced Robert Whitaker, who is apparently now a prospect, and that he specifically used the phrase, the evolution of Robert Whitaker. And I just want to say, I really want to hammer it home. This was a classic Bobby Knuckles performance. This was all the normal shit he likes to do, and it's all the shit he would have liked to do to the likes of Adesanya and Till. And it just wasn't as effective against those guys. I think this is sort of, a style-defining sort of fight. Whitaker's got the feints and the footwork. He's got the jabs, which he's still better than basically anyone else in MMA at doubling and tripling up the jab and working off of it. And he's going to use that to set up right hands. And he's going to use the threat of that combo to set up jabs into high kicks. All the classic Bobby Knuckle shit was in this fight. So I just want to quash any idea of, I don't know, maybe you disagree, Phil. Did you see any new wrinkles from Robert Whitaker?
It was really it's hard to say because again, then we start looking at, Romero as an analysis benchmark, which we've told ourselves we shouldn't do. It was a particularly left-hand heavy, Bobby Knuckles fight.
Yeah.
He wasn't low kicking with Cannoneer that much, wasn't doing the push kicks or the front kicks. It was really focused on a single technique. And I think that probably is a sort of minor mark, I think, for the Adesanya fight. I think what we spoke about was that he really should focus on his lead hand much more.
It was effective in that fight, yeah.
Yeah. I think pretty much it's the right take. This is just Whitaker being Whitaker and Cannoneer being Cannoneer. There's obviously negatives to take away from the fight as well. It was still a pretty tough fight. He won it very clearly.
Yeah, Cannoneer definitely, basic as it may have been, he had the right read. If you're gonna want to land consistently on Robert Whitaker, throw low kicks. He's gonna eat them.
Yeah, I said on Twitter, this was a fight where Whitaker was able to have a tough win against someone whose plan was basically just to do the low kick.
Mm-hmm.
And Israel Adesanya, as we have seen, sort of increasingly, I think, throughout his MMA career, I think we're seeing as championship Israel is sort of defining himself. This is one of his primary tools now.
He's a kicking machine.
Not really sure.
Yeah,
I'm not really sure that he was that much of a low kicker when he started coming into UFC, but he really is now.
No, I don't think he was. I think he's always been a phenomenal kicker. Adesanya has always given you the impression of having baseball bat sort of power in his kicks. As skinny as his legs look, his shins crack when they catch people on the head. But yeah, he's really invested in the low kicks. Maybe that's a specific reaction to these like more aggressive opponents he's been fighting or whatever, but it's been working brilliantly, and it would obviously be a very good investment against Whitaker, because going back to the Uriah Hall and Rafael Natal fights, there's probably one before those fights that includes Robert Whitaker just eating low kick after low kick. It's always been part of his a flaw, I guess, in his game.
Yeah. So I don't think there's much of a reason to assume that like he wouldn't still just be able to do that, but instead of, Whitaker being drawn into like, instead of Whitaker being able to jab Cannoneer up for free, and instead of him being able to chase Cannoneer for free,
Yep.
it would be fighting someone with much better defense and someone who can counter him when he rushes in.
Yep.
So yeah, I still think, unfortunately, it's still a tough matchup for Whitaker. I don't think there's anything in this fight which showed that it wouldn't be.
Yeah, in fact, this fight, like, I don't know, it felt like a nail in a mental coffin. Like, it really sold me on the idea, like, I wouldn't pick Bobby Knuckles in a rematch. I get it.
Yep.
I see the full picture better than I think I've seen it before, so.
By the way, I have checked the Fight Site staff predictions. I think actually slightly more than half of them picked Whitaker.
Oh, that means, you know what this means, Phil. Kyle's grip
You're a
is
racist towards young people?
Well, that goes without saying. Kyle's grip is weakening. There's a power vacuum in the leadership structure of the fights that we, Phil, you and I, could be kings.
If only you hadn't been quite so brutal when you'd fired Ed.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. But they never have to find the body, Swearom sweet Swearom doesn't have to know about that. Shh, Swearom, he's sitting on my lap. I'm like petting his hair. He really wants to leave. It's visible on his face. Can I ask you about Robert Whitaker's chin? Because it does seem to be a relevant point of topic all the time these days. Any opinions on it? Has it changed? Is it worse? Is it bad? Is it good?
I would say it is okay.
Yeah.
I think he has incredible recoverability.
He's in insanely good shape.
Yeah.
Always, yeah.
There's there was a stat in one of the Hajime no Ippo games, like it literally had heart. You could get knocked down easily, but you could get up again. He has that. He just has recoverability, but he doesn't have a great chin. He's not one of these guys who just shrugs off shots. He never really has been.
Yeah.
He's always back in the fight pretty quickly after that, unless he's getting polished off a la Underboy or Izzy.
Uh-huh. I tend to agree. I just think he has a normal chin. Which is probably still much better than a normal person's chin. But as far as fighting goes, I don't think it's weak. I do think it is a concern. Like, it does sort of emphasize this idea that, like, at middleweight, it's not like he's been getting hit by feather-fisted fighters and getting hurt. Like, the people who have hurt him are Yoel Romero, Darren Till, and Jared Cannoneer, and Darren Till is probably the least imposing guy of that group, and he's a guy who, like, hurts everyone in the first round. So, it's not like, they are hitters touching him, giving him this effect, but also, like, it's 185. This is the point at which, like, everyone starts to become a pretty respectable hitter.
Mm-hmm.
So it does, like I said, underscore this feeling that Whitaker, he just can't afford to make that many mistakes at the elite of this division, that his successes are going to depend on him having increasingly flawless defense, which I just don't see really being an option against the likes of Adesanya. I say the likes of, against Adesanya. Who else is like Adesanya? But, I just think it's normal. I don't think getting hurt by Jared Cannoneer when he is in a point where he really needs to hurt you to win the fight is really that shocking or anything.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned at some point we were talking about, what the traits are for a successful mixed martial artist. I think possibly the most important one was just durability.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that a lot lately with guys like, weirdly enough, guys like Holland and Stewart, were just
Mm-hmm.
able to just implement their own games against each other because it didn't really matter if they screwed up.
Right.
Seen it with guys like Chito Vera. Talking about this with, Zane was mentioning this on Twitter, I think.
Khabib.
We're discussing like John Jones. I mean, Khabib, yeah. But they're discussing, how does John Jones match up against Khabib and what defines Khabib and his intelligence. And they're like, well, what do you think about Khabib's intelligence? I mean, what do you think about John Jones' intelligence? He's saying, what I really think is that John Jones is incredibly tough.
Yeah, that intelligence is perhaps not the most impressive aspect of John Jones's skull. The thickness thereof is
unthinkably durable.
Yes, he really, really is. Basically never been visibly hurt. Like once, right?
I mean,
Did
not
Reyes?
badly.
Did Reyes?
I've never seen him you've never seen him where you've been like, oh, he's on the verge of getting knocked
Yeah,
out.
right. Reyes hit him clean, but I actually don't recall an example of Reyes putting him on wobbly legs. And Rashad Evans kicked him in the head and had his knees buckle for half a second. I think that's the most hurt he's ever been.
Yeah, I've seen him buzzed.
Yeah.
Like Khabib against Poirier and Johnson, you're like, oh yeah, he's buzzed.
Yeah, he has to blink, but that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Maybe that's a limiting factor for Whitaker. Granted, Whitaker has far better defense than most of the people at this level, but that is a group that does not include Adesanya. So again, I just think this really cements Whitaker as, I don't know, second best guy in the division.
Yeah, he's just the Edgar to his Aldo at this point,
Yep.
I think, even without the rematch.
Yep, I still love him, and they just only have him fight these guys. Why bother? Have him fight Iwan Kutalaba. Who cares? Speaking of which, can we talk about Iwan Kutalaba for a second?
Hell yes, I'm always down to talk about Iwan Kutalaba.
I mean, realistically, there was no way in hell this was going to live up to the bar set by the ending of the first fight. It was a 50-second fight that ended for no reason. And then Kutalaba got really mad. Everything about it was perfectly timed. It was so funny. Expecting it to be as funny as the first one would have been like expecting Jared Brooks to knock himself out a second time in a row. Just, it's not going to happen. But it was pretty good. I mean,
he gave it the old college try.
He really did. He really went out there. He swung for the bleachers. Every single moment that Kutalaba got hurt by Ankalaev was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Actually, it may not have been as funny as the first fight, but it is numbers 2, 3, and 4 occurred in this fight on the list of funniest shit in MMA.
Yeah. So which did you prefer, the first knockdown or the KO?
It's a tough choice because really it's a choice between, as I believe you put it, a choice between Kutalaba getting knocked down during approximately the first fifth of a spin. In fact, the timing of the exchange looks like he gets hit with a jab and then decides to start spinning as he's falling down. Cause he clearly, that trigger fired when he saw the jab coming, but the spin hasn't even begun by the time it connects. He's way too slow. So that's funny. But the knockdown is a combination of him trying to, again, to borrow your phrase, backhand pimp slap Ankalaev with one hand, while the other arm, in cartoonish fashion, is fully extended, flung out behind him for a punch that would have made Todd Duffy proud. He was really just selling out so insanely both times that he got floored. So it's honestly a very hard choice. Although,
I mean, yeah,
well, please.
As perhaps MMA's most recent and greatest comedic genius, I like to think he was combining a tribute to two of heavyweight MMA's funniest moments. One being the Duffy punch,
Duffy mirror,
and the second, being the Arlovsky versus Brown pimp hand.
Yes,
he's just battering him with right hands and then back fists him rather than throw a left.
Yep.
I think he tried to do those both at the same time, and honestly, it's a pretty admirable attempt.
he tried to do the back fist into the left hook. He was trying to do like a spinning combo where just both hands are continuously hitting the opponent. Just Tasmanian devil style. I mean, I gotta say though, like this really was, this paralleled to me like Whitaker Cannoneer as, a fight that was, here you have a relatively foot slow opponent who is, aggressive, has to be aggressive because he can't just hang out at range. And, you can kind of tell everything he's gonna do before he does it. So basically you have Cutelaba, like Cannoneer, was the perfect blank canvas for a sort of combination outfighting counterpunching performance. And that's exactly what Ankalaev did. Last time he was a crazy aggressive and that's what initiated the exchanges. This time he largely let Cutelaba come after him and counterpunched and otherwise kept him on the end of the jab. And he's pretty good at it. Like, I can't say that some of the combinations he was throwing were any uglier than Jan Blachowicz'. And they were certainly about as well timed and well considered. I mean, it was a really compelling striking performance from Ankalaev.
Yeah, I mean, he genuinely is a problem in this division. Like, he's got hand speed, he's got basic, like, ring craft and movement. I think there were some moments where we saw, you know, we know he is a very good grappler and wrestler already.
Right.
But we saw things like him being able to move from an outside striking game into aggressive clinch attacks and then disengaging. If you want to like run an outside striking game, it's pretty important to do that. Otherwise you end up, just Barbosering or JDSing yourself out of the fight.
Something that who knows how it would have gone, but, something that Justin Geichi probably should have been more willing to do. Force clinches.
Yeah, so I mean, he looks like a future contender, which to say at light heavyweight, I mean, he's already had his insane light heavyweight prospect loss.
Yes, one of the best
and
ever.
What better one could you get?
Yeah.
And losing at whatever it was, like 4 minutes 59 of the third round to Paul Craig. But yeah, I mean, he is easily the best prospect in this division at the moment.
Wow, it really was 4:59. That is the funniest. It really was literally the final second of the fight. He could have just not tapped and started to pass out and he would have won. Yeah, I think he did it. I now believe he did all of that on purpose because he knew the price you have to pay for contention in this division. You have to have it truly. Light heavyweight prospect losses can't just be instructive. They have to be humiliating.
Yeah.
And I think he made damn sure to tick all the boxes.
He's made his sacrifice to Modestus.
That's Modestus.
He's free to continue his career.
By the way, I've already decided, I don't know if you've picked up on this on Twitter, but I've decided the new angle for Modestus is that he is an all-powerful deity who is just continually losing and having to pretend that it's part of his omniscient plan.
Does make sense.
Yeah.
What other explanation could there be?
Right. Okay. Last but not least, and these are long segments. We're going to have pretty short time for our previews, but I don't think anyone will mind too much. Except for all of the people who are lame enough to leave comments and replies. Casey Kenny, Nathaniel Wood. This was another one that Ed and I talked about on the Patreon, last week. And, take it away, Phil. What did you think about this? Clearly the most meaningful fight on the undercard. What did you think of it?
I mean, this was, easily the third best fight on this card on paper, and was for some reason not even the featured prelim.
Yep.
Very weird placing. I mean, I think the UFC really should recognize how good this division is. It was very, very, very strange. Maybe they just thought that because Kenny is nominally a grappler. I don't know. But
did they see his he had like a celebrated action performance in his last fight, which was on October 4th.
Yeah, I don't know.
Also,
anyway.
Even his grappling performances are high-paced and entertaining.
Yep.
I don't think there's any good explanation other than that UFC continues to be convinced as an organization that, like big fat American fans don't care about tiny fighters. And the evidence for this is that when they don't tell those big fat Americans about those fighters, they don't know who they are. And I think that that continues to be the thought process for why Tai Tuivasa, at this point too, Tai Tuivasa at the end of a 3-fight losing streak gets
the featured prelim, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's vile.
Yeah. And I guess I understand because Lauren Murphy got a title shot out of it. So but a women's flyweight fight over nominally a I know it was a catchweight, but this is a bantamweight prospect matchup or contender matchup. Volkov Harris, Phil Halls, Jacob Malkoon. These things are on the main card I know. Anyway.
Yeah, but this fight was a banger on paper and really exceeded expectations.
Yeah, maybe third best on paper, in outcome, second best on the card.
It was,
arguably first best because it had less
in terms of just like an action-packed fight.
Yeah.
It's easily the fight of the night.
Khabib Geichi, I do think it seemed so dominant. It was thrilling. It was yes. I described it on Twitter as an avalanche versus a man who sincerely believed he could knock an avalanche out. Yeah. It was absolutely thrilling from beginning to end. But in terms of back and forth, momentum swings, and longer periods of more action, Kenny Wood is a banger. If you guys missed this fight, you gotta watch it. It was really good.
Yeah, so this was, it was just like a real, it played out almost entirely on the feet, apart from some grappling exchanges, which were pretty much neutral in the third round, I think. Mm-hmm. Kenny sort of got a bit of a takedown on Wood, but it didn't really go anywhere, and so almost all on the feet, and it was just like a real power versus volume fight.
Mm-hmm.
Kenny was trying to pick his shots, trying to generally just be a lot more defensively sound than Wood was.
Yeah.
And Wood was just trying to set up stuff with volume, heavy on the jab, heavy on the low kicks. And yeah, it just never stopped. It was back and forth the whole way. It was incredibly tightly contested. I don't think there's a particularly clear winner in this fight.
No.
I know a lot of people seem to think that I think Kenny got the first round. I thought Wood probably on my card. I think Wood probably took 2 and 3. But yeah, this was a fantastic fight. What did you think?
Yeah, according to just to check, according to MMA Decisions, looking like about 3/4 of people gave it to Kenny, all 29-28.
Yeah. Wow.
But that's certainly not there's enough room in there to justify picking Wood. I think based on the fight, if you're picking Kenny really confidently, it's mostly because you like his wrestling success in the third round. That appears to be the swing round, because I agree. I think he got the first. He landed the crisper shots. I found this to be a really encouraging performance for both of these guys who are still developing, developing their games. Like you said for Kenny, it was a really considered aggressive performance. It was sort of an aggressive counterpunching. That was sort of the foundation of it. A lot of slipping into left hands. Lots and lots of pressure, but he wasn't reckless. He really was using his defense as a lead, as the link into exchanges. And for Nathaniel Wood, I think we just saw him continuing to build on what he showed in his last fight, against, was it John Castanedas? Yes, John Castaneda. Which is, an insanely active and educated lead hand. As you said, he was on the volume end of the power versus volume scale. Super educated lead hand, lots of feints, lots of jabs, lots of left hooks off of jabs. All of that looks amazing, especially against a southpaw. God, I love to see people hooking off the jab against southpaws, and it worked really well as the fight wore on. But also something else we saw against Castaneda was Wood kind of keying in and getting defensively better himself as the fight went on. I do think his first line of defense against this kind of aggression, as it was against Castaneda, is to punch back. He's got to put traffic out there, and each of those jabs is what allows him to move his feet. You know, these are his wedges, so he needs to start just throwing them and see if one of them happens to stick itself under the door. But, like after the first round, he does seem to he gets the range, and when Nathaniel Wood gets to a point where he is just, he knows his distance to the point that he's just landing clean jabs at will, it's almost as attractive as when Robert Whitaker does it. I'll put it that way. It's very pleasing to the eye. The second round of this fight in particular is like an aesthetic delight to me. I really like, Wood's style and how it works. But yeah, man, I also never thought Casey Kenny would be like this aggressive, southpaw pressure counterpunching force either.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people comparing his like new game to like Luke Rockhold's.
What?
But he's much more aggressive and also functional than Luke Rockhold.
What's the basis of the Rockhold comparison?
Southpaw big kicker, a good grappling game. I don't know. Yeah,
I don't really get that. I guess in broad strokes, I don't know. It doesn't seem like a particularly instructive comparison to me. It's like, I don't know, if Luke Rockhold could do like a passing imitation of Peter Yan, you know? Cause Kenny has always had, he's always been a pleasant mix of technical and scrappy. There's like generally good form on every strike that he attempts, but also like, he knows in a fight when it's more about like pace and intensity than form. He has frequently in the past had moments where people will walk him down and hit him, and he will just absolutely sell out on like a 4 or 5 punch combination and just try to will his way back into control of the fight. He's still in this, like he retained, I think, that willingness to just slug it out and have crazy exchanges. But yeah, it was like everything was really quite well set up. There were a good amount of feints from him. Every bit of defense that worked, led to some kind of offense. Like it was very rare that he would slip anything and not instantly come back with a shot of his own. I just thought, yeah, smart and very exciting from both guys.
Yeah, we saw both guys kind of having defensive reactions and using them to build like into exchanges. This wasn't one of those fights where I think it was, because very rare in MMA do you see fights where one guy isn't willing to just bail out of the exchanges. You know, a kind of Lawler versus Hendricks dynamic.
Right. Actually getting to see layers answering layers.
Yeah. So like, Kenny would come in with a right hook and, like push Wood back, and then, like he would land a left hand, but Wood would be happy to watch it, even happy to eat it in situations, and then would come back with his own like left hook counter. Like there were a lot of combinations which got closed in ways which combination exchanges which got closed in ways which just doesn't really happen all that often in this sport. But it was also like, unlike something like Lawler Hendricks, like it was a big kicking match as well.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed Wood's, like the part where the way he would just tap away with the jab to bring the guard up and then start attacking at the legs as well. Like, yeah, just like a fantastic fight.
Another wrinkle.
One of the best this year, I think.
I agree. Yeah. Another wrinkle was Wood's, decision in round 2 to start throwing counter elbows. Very, very good adjustment. He had a guy who was continually wanting to crash into the pocket. So instead of throwing counter right hands, he just shortened them up and started throwing cross counter right elbows. And they worked beautifully. I also just love how Wood, jabs at the ends of exchanges. Like I know these are like boring pedestrian things probably to most people, but they're things MMA fighters never do. And whether he's retreating or he's attacked and missed and the opponent is retreating, he basically always like sticks a jab on the end of a combination. And it's just a good idea. Like, it keeps the guy moving backwards. If he's moving backwards, it stops him chasing you if you're trying to get away. He just gives the impression of a very schooled opponent. And Kenny likewise, except leaning a little more on being insanely gritty and mean. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was kick-ass. Again, listeners, if you haven't seen it, go watch that fight right now. You owe it to yourself. You watched Tuivasa Struve, right? You gotta watch this. Okay. Well, let's take one more break. When we come back, we are going to look ahead to next week's sort of perplexing main event and fascinating co-main event, and also Kevin Holland is here after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Very quickly, moving through UFC, whatever the fuck it is, Silva versus Hall. We're going to talk about, I think, just 2 fights from this card, to be honest. Side note, as you pointed out to me earlier, Phil, Bloody Elbow collaborator Victor Rodriguez is on this card.
Good luck to him.
Good luck. He's fighting Adrian, it's either Yanez or Yanes. Not sure. I expect Vic is going to probably have some really good burns about that silly name as he's being submitted, but I wish him the best. Vic.
It's a brutal weight cut.
You could do, yeah, it gets a bantamweight. Jesus Christ, Vic. I didn't even notice that. That is brutal. But I think we're mostly just going to talk about the main event and the co-main. Uriah Hall versus Anderson Silva is the main event, which seems like really the final referendum, I guess, on, there's only one way to prove if you're truly the next Anderson Silva. And that is by beating Anderson Silva. Now Israel Adesanya may have taken a small lead in that foot race when he beat Anderson Silva and then became, champion and then defended the title twice. But I think there's still a chance for Uriah Hall to prove that he is the next Anderson Silva by, beating the version of him that was already beaten by all the other good fighters. I don't know. What do you think, Phil?
I think that the word referendum is probably the important one here. This is like asking the real question of Uriah Hall, which is, how much can you possibly get into your own head?
Yes.
Like, this is the single biggest fight where there is the largest gulf between presumably the physical presence of the person in front of him and the legend and the myth of the person in front of him.
Right.
We've seen lots of other people, including, I think, Israel Adesanya to at least some extent, be slightly awed by the fact that it's Anderson Silva in front of them.
Who wouldn't be?
And give him like competitive fights and like be scared by him when he starts to do scary things. I think it was very telling that I think Jared Cannoneer, who is, someone who will, as we have seen, approach curious school children with terrifying intensity, had absolutely no fear of Anderson Silva.
Yeah, he just pictured that
Jared Cannoneer is insane.
He just pictured that little girl's face and went the fuck after her.
Yeah.
He really delivered on the Adesanya Costa expectation, like too dumb to be cowed. He just didn't care.
Exactly. I think he remembered like that Overeem gif. He was like, how would I attack a small child that I was angry with? kick their leg out as hard as I physically could, and he got a leg kick TKO on Anderson Silva.
To be fair, it is the funniest way to strike a child. Oh, a leg kick? It really is.
It was, but I don't want to agree with you. You're a terrible person.
Well, no one said I wasn't.
Yeah, so Uriah Hall is obviously at exactly the opposite end of this spectrum.
Yeah.
He's exactly the kind of person who's going to look at and respect Anderson Silva and be, and potentially kind of get the bed and lose a decision to him.
Yes.
And that actually gives this some genuine intrigue where it wouldn't otherwise. If it was anyone else other than Uriah Hall who was inside Uriah Hall's body, you would just pick them to wipe poor Anderson Silva out.
Oh, absolutely.
And probably still going to pick that to happen. I think, Silva is now, you've seen the physicality is simply gone. And I think Hall will probably just panic himself into annihilating Silva at some point.
Yeah. Here's the thing is that I think this may be the worst possible time for Uriah Hall to fight Anderson Silva, because Silva still has like these moments of encouraging people to still believe in, the legend, the myth. The aggressive, like, a lot of it's hocus pocus, right? It's like, as Adesanya figured out at points, like, if I just throw something when he's doing all this, like, he's actually just, it's just like a ruse to reclaim the initiative. There's not really that much, like, reaction time and speed backing up this aggressive, it's posturing. So that obviously is already going to work on Uriah Hall, but also Anderson's at the point in his career where he's nice to everyone. And we know how Uriah Hall reacts to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we remember the John Howard fight, right? They paused the action, what action there was, about 7 times to shake hands and hug. Uriah Hall was bullied as a child. Everybody knows this. He talks about it often. It appears to be the psychological basis for his entire style. And if you bully him, then you will freak him out into attacking you. But if Anderson Silva just like bullies him at moments and is otherwise like asking for a staring match at range, I don't know how consistent Uriah Hall is going to be with that. I really don't.
What I'm starting to be scared of now that you've mentioned it, the way to win this for Silva is to do like Carter at range.
Yes.
Like, just do cool stuff and invite Uriah Hall into the equivalent of a dance-off.
Yes. It sounds funny, but genuinely, that's the move, right? Is just lots of posturing, lots of feinting, basically lots of bullshit.
And he should try and do whatever like spinning attacks he can muster with his frame. He should do like, martial arts poses a lot. A lot of martial arts poses.
Yep.
And try and get Uriah Hall to do them as well. Because that will burn the clock. And then at key moments, he should just do a flurry and then run away and then pose some more.
Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if that's enough that I should be picking Anderson Silva. I mean, it's like Uriah Hall is the reason people said the next Anderson Silva. Other than the fact that Dana White was the first one to say it, and he noticed that Uriah Hall is obviously, like Anderson, black. The other reasons for that comparison were like that physically speaking, Uriah Hall is an incredibly good fighter. It's too easy to forget that, but like the dude has power and speed and really good technique. He's like a tightly controlled, powerful fighter with great reaction time and all of this. It's all, I do believe basically all of his limitations are psychological. So like,
he still has like generally pretty terrible cagecraft and
yes,
chunky defense and stuff, but like offensively, he is extremely clean and
yes.
Like in terms of offense and punching form and so on, he's very dangerous.
Yeah, he's maybe a bit of like a Lorenz Larkin, and that he can be pushed around, but like, yeah, a super well put together, offensive kickboxer. And honestly, I think even the footwork tends to suffer because of the psychology. Like, I think when Uriah Hall's feeling good, his footwork is all right. And the more you pressure him and the more you try to intimidate him, the more it just sort of falls apart. You know what I mean? It's not like a constant level of poor cagecraft. He will have moments of good and bad. And, so all of this does sort of suggest that, like, it should be one of those matchups where I'm like, yeah, Anderson Silva's gonna freak him out, but then Uriah Hall's just gonna accidentally kill Anderson Silva.
That is my take.
Right, with like one kick. I'm gonna pick Anderson, because why the fuck not? Wouldn't it be amazing if he won? Wouldn't it be awesome?
Yeah, it would be very funny.
Like, I like Uriah. I don't, you know, I always kind of feel bad when he loses, but I can just see, like, Anderson, like, he did genuinely have success against Adesanya, who was in a similar way, a little awed. But, like, I think the reaction that Adesanya has when you start landing shots on him that, like, he hasn't seen coming, when you start surprising him with things, is very different to the response that Uriah Hall is going to have when, like, the guy that he has probably idolized since he was a child starts landing that right hand. So I don't care. I'm picking Anderson. There's no good reason to do it. It's a bad idea. Don't care. Can we talk about the real main event?
Yes.
Andre Fili versus Bryce Mitchell at featherweight. Co-main, I mean, it's obvious why it's not the main event. Even though the UFC is clearly, grooming Bryce Mitchell as, you know, I don't know if a star, if he really has star potential, but certainly as like a highlight fighter that they want to market. He's not Anderson Silva, and he didn't knock a guy out on tough 10 years ago, so I get it. But, this is the best fight on the card. Like, this is a very compelling matchup. Not only is it meaningful for the division, but Andre Fili is a fighter that I always consider to be like a really good measuring stick, of other like prospects and, developing early contenders in the division. And Bryce Mitchell is, like one of the best action fighters in the sport today. He is always thrilling. So I'm very into this one. I guess I should kick it off. I left a silence there, Phil, but that silence probably meant, didn't you scout? Didn't you scout one of the guys in this fight? And yes, I did. Rather than recuse myself, I'll just say up front, I scouted Bryce Mitchell, for a coach of Andre Fili's. And, I don't think it's made it easier for me to pick the fight is the problem. The more I know about Bryce Mitchell, the more avenues I can see to how to figure him out. It's much harder at that point to step out and look at Fili as an opponent objectively and say, what is he likely to do? What is he going to do based on what we've seen from him before? And based on the trajectory, of gradual improvement that he's been experiencing over the last couple of years. Very difficult. But I can tell you who Bryce Mitchell is, I think, pretty clearly. Bryce Mitchell is like the type of guy that we're going to be seeing a lot of in the, what is apparently now the post-Khabib era. His game is very much the modern MMA, wrestling grappling game. It's pressure based largely. He's actually quite capable of getting shit done off the back foot, whether it's reactive shots or counter punches. But it's a lot of aggressive counter punching to set up, single legs, which get his opponent to the fence. And once they're on the fence, it's body lock takedowns. You know, there are other wrinkles. He is a guy with like, much more so than Khabib even, I think. He is a guy who is just willing to experiment and try crazy things. It's a little less like narrowly defined, his process, but pretty much the process at its core is the same. And then once he gets you down, it's like, hard control positions, riding positions. He likes that Dagestani handcuff, cross wrist, from the back against the fence. He likes 3/4 mount a lot to sort of stick his opponent in like a no man's land between half guard and mount. and, an easy path to back control as well. But really the whole game is like, I'm going to put pressure on you so that you are forced to make one of a small group of predictable decisions. And when you do that, I'm going to catch you in the transition. It's classic pressure fighter mentality. It's how he operates both on the feet and on the ground. And, I think Andre Fili is really interesting as an opponent because he has two things that most Mitchell opponents don't, or rather, maybe I should say, he has things that the people Mitchell beats up don't have. Namely reach and wrestling. And, I do think these are big factors. Like Bryce Mitchell, unlike Khabib, is like a long, tall guy. And certainly he appears to be most comfortable with his striking, and the pressure it creates that leads to his ground game. When he can keep people on the end of his reach, especially his counterpunching, it's like 100% backstep counters. He's going to touch you with the jab. He's going to feint a lot. He's going to put you in a position where you feel like you have to bridge the gap. And then when you try to do it, he's going to hop back and then come back in, usually with like a straight left hand. And, like if you have reach and you can still touch him as he's trying to do his backstep, if you can throw off his sense of distance, I think you kill a lot of the pressure, and a lot of the confidence that he has on the feet. Cause that's the thing. Like Phil, you agree with me on this. He's a shockingly good striker, Bryce Mitchell.
Yes.
You think of him as an action grappler guy, which he is, but along similar lines to, say, Brian Ortega, there is like real he understands how striking works. Not only how it fits into his broader goals, but like he's good at it. And then the final thing is, the people who make Mitchell look bad, Bobby Moffitt, Tyler Diamond, who like everyone is a fighter so unremarkable, everyone's always forgotten about him. And Brad Katona, these guys took a pretty wrestling heavy approach to, Mitchell. Not only did they extend the scrambles when Mitchell did get his takedowns, like preventing him from securing position, but whenever they were given an opportunity to take a position themselves, they did it with a wrestler's mindset. And me and Ed kind of talked about this, I think, last week. Like, what is the real distinction between what is mat wrestling and what is jiu-jitsu when there's so much blurring of those lines? And I said basically, that it's just a mindset thing. It's like, what is your ultimate goal on the ground? Are you trying to maintain position and wear the opponent out? Are you, when you see an exposed back, are you thinking, how do I hold on to this position as long as possible? Or are you thinking, how do I make this position as miserable as possible? And I think a focus on making positions miserable, on riding, on using front headlocks to keep weight on Mitchell's back and neck, like that's the angle to take. If you try to lock up a guillotine, you're going to end up on your back. It's over. You've just lost the round, like Khabib. If you try to sink the hooks in and take his back fully, I mean, Brad Katona did finish him with that, but only after 2.5 rounds of like intense fighting in which Katona was hurt several times. And typically when people do that, Mitchell reverses. He doesn't fear the submission. So at all. And he sees every submission attempt against him as an opportunity to advance and reverse and then start working on his own submissions, which all chain together in a really streamlined way. So I think if you're going to beat Mitchell on the ground, you have to never allow him to set up. And you have to, just like approach openings the way a wrestler would and don't be willing to give your back. Don't be willing to trade submission for submission. You have to keep the pressure on him. So I think Fili can do these things, but Jesus Christ, is he gonna? I don't fucking know. And it's really hard for me to pick because I scouted for the guy. So Phil, you pick, you do it.
God damn it.
You do it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the main thing is I'm expecting, Fili to play something of a back foot game. I'm not really expecting him to be super aggressive. I don't think as we've mentioned, he's much better when he's aggressive, but he's not particularly, diligent about holding the front foot.
He's always a bit of a drifter. You know, he kind of...
Yeah. He sort of takes the direction that his opponent gives him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he is going to be on the back foot in this fight. I'm not sure if that's a great place to be.
Doesn't seem like
so.
The best
I mean, the main thing that I find myself thinking is how well can Mitchell's pace hold up? Because that's one area in which it's very, unless you've got like the power of Sadiq Yusuf, or you're just, you know, as quick as Michael Johnson, it's pretty difficult to just keep up with Fili, just with the amount of strikes that he puts out.
Sure.
And
three times Mitchell, in those three wrestling heavy opponents I mentioned, 3 times Mitchell has flagged badly in the third round. He still fights really hard, but he gets visibly tired.
Yeah. But I do think that, like, Rosa is also approximately someone who will take a back foot approach. And I was genuinely shocked at how easy Mitchell made that fight look.
Yeah.
Everywhere. On the feet. I mean, he did better on the feet than Shane Burgos did.
Mm-hmm.
At least early.
Yep.
You know, he was much more clean and consistent, much more defensively responsible. I mean, this isn't saying much, but it is Shane Burgos. But, no, it just goes to show you, like, I was expecting Charles Rosa to give him an extremely tough fight, and maybe, like, Mitchell would have to struggle to close him down. He did not at all. And yeah, like you said, he's shown shocking improvements in his striking. I think in his grappling as well. I mean,
oh yeah, that's the 3/4 mount game, like, and the arm triangle, like, the whole series that basically the entire Rosa fight comprised was never visible to that degree.
Yeah,
before.
He struggled. I mean, like, he was struggling in grappling matches in Tough,
right.
And then like Manny Bermudez was considered to be one of the, you know, premier submission grapplers at this weight class. Rosa tapped him, and then Mitchell just ran over Rosa on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Just ran him over. Didn't really have a moment's success that I can remember in that fight.
No.
So,
his success, he was entirely defensive. He was the best defender, certainly compared to Matt Sales. He got out of the twister 3 times, but he also got put in the twister 3 times.
Yeah. What I see from Mitchell is just like, looks like a future contender. He's improving in every area. He's fearless enough to go for things. Like, he's showing significant improvements in his entire game. And Fili hasn't really been able to stop those guys. Like you said, he's a benchmark. He's a benchmark for whether you're going to be a contender, or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Bryce is looking like a contender, and that's pretty much it. Because other than that, as you say, I can't really find, because there's too many unknowns. I don't know how well it matches up. I don't know whether, like, Mitchell's just going to get jabbed up trying to chase Fili down. I don't know whether if he fails on a bunch of takedowns, he'll just get super tired.
Yeah, right. Like, the other thing to consider in conjunction with that is the fact that Fili looked jacked in his last 2 fights.
Mm-hmm.
He is 30 years old. Bryce Mitchell is not all that physically imposing. I think he's a good athlete. He's agile. He's light in his feet. He's got quick hands. Like, there's a lot of speed and snappiness to Mitchell's athleticism, but he's not strong. Like, he still sort of looks like a boy sometimes when he ties up with people like, say, Tyler Diamond. They kind of muscle him around a little bit. So I think that's probably changing for him as well. Like, they talked a lot during the Rosa fight about his strength and conditioning program, and certainly he didn't gas in that one, but he also wasn't pressured. He wasn't missing on takedowns. I mean, I think it's like a Khabib fight. Like, if Fili can stop the takedowns, consistently, everything changes. No matter how good Mitchell is on the feet, I do think that has a serious impact. Cause like Mitchell he wants to hit those takedowns. I think he'll keep trying. And I do think that might have an effect on his energy levels. I think also, like, he's going to be encouraged to do that because he's fighting someone on the feet who has a bigger, I mean, let me actually check the numbers here. Fili's reach is, according to Wikipedia, 74 inches compared to Bryce Mitchell's 70. So like I think that is significant. It leads me to believe that Mitchell, despite his unexpected striking acumen, is going to be encouraged to get this to the ground. So to me, like, that is the big question. Does he succeed? Feely's not easy to take down or out wrestle.
Uh-huh.
Like, he doesn't really get enough credit for it. But he's an alpha male fighter, and it looks like it when he gets into wrestling scrambles. So maybe he can just deny them. I don't know. It's a biased pick for me, obviously. I have to pick Andre. And I think there's a pretty clear avenue or two by which he could do it. But I agree. I think Mitchell is that kind of like contender talent, you know, and Andre Feely may have gotten himself into a position where he almost actually beat another person like that in Sadiq Yusuf in a very credible performance, but also, you know, he has typically been the benchmark. So I'm going to pick him, but for obvious reasons. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's just a lot of unknowns here. I mean, he is, except he's very experienced. He's hard. He's difficult to take down in Mitchell's, like, butter area. He has lost to, he has gotten submitted by Holloway and obviously by, Godofredo Pepe. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to really think of that. He's just a crafty dude. You know, likes that Whitaker change up. You know, he likes to set it up with the jab and then throw the 1-2 and then throw the 1-2 head kick. He's a very crafty guy. And, it's more just a feeling about Mitchell, just that this guy has surprised me the last 2 times I've seen him.
I mean, it is the kind of rapid progression that you see, right? That's really the hallmark of why we're like, oh, this guy's going to be something. Cause he is getting better in a really like scarily sort of focused, quick way. So, all right. Well, those are the top 2 fights. And, Kevin Holland, he's fighting a guy. We don't have time for it. We already spent way too much time talking about last weekend's main and co-main. So I'm sorry, Kevin. We will talk about your fight next week when we will also.
I mean, we can say one thing about it. Makhmud Muradov is like, he's really similar to Alessio Di Chirico. He had a fight with Alessio Di Chirico, which was basically a mirror match. Which means Kevin Holland's probably going to have a pretty close, frustrating fight with him, which Kevin Holland's probably going to win.
Yeah, I do wonder if Holland isn't getting better at those kinds of fights as well. A little better at asserting his reach, you know, aggressively making it a factor for his opponent to deal with. But we will see. In addition to that, next week we're going to get to talk about Thiago Santos versus Glover Teshera, which is a bizarrely significant light heavyweight fight. Like, whoever wins this fight is going to be the next title challenger. Which is awesome. I would love to see either of them fight for the title. I love the new light heavyweight division. I want the Jan Blachowicz era to never end.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's bittersweet.
Yeah.
Santos match.
Yeah, it is. It's also got on this card, Ian Heinisch. Strong Belwas himself is making his return against Brendan Allen, who is another person like Bryce Mitchell, a submission guy who rapidly seems to be getting better and more confident. So that's a cool matchup. Anyway, we're going to talk about, oh no. Carlos Diego Fajeda versus Drew Dober got canceled, didn't it? That's a bummer. Well, anyway, we'll talk about that and commiserate about it next week. Hope all of you enjoyed the show. Make sure you find us on social media. If you did, if you didn't, then you can find my alt account, which as I mentioned a couple weeks ago is at Pulgas Boxeo. Make sure that you send all of your like really vitriolic responses to that. But if you have compliments, you can find me on my main account at Boxing Bush, BUSCH. You can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. These are on Twitter, of course. And, well, Phil, anything to plug, before we depart?
Nothing I've written. I did enjoy the, breakdown by one of the Fight Site lads on, Nurmagomedov and Geichi. I think it was, Aiden Hayes. That was great.
One. The really young one.
Oh yeah, he's probably too young to either vape or he's probably not too young to scooter.
They're destroying that poor lad's life.
Yeah.
He's gonna have scraped knees, rotten lungs. Poor little bastard. As for me, I guess I will plug something of my own. It wasn't it's not particularly relevant now that he lost, but it also wasn't intended to be extremely relevant to the matchup in the first place. I wrote last week about Justin Geichi's improving defense and how that has become a central aspect of his striking game. So make sure you go check that out if you still want to learn about Justin Geichi. I mean, the guy said he wants to fight in 4 to 6 weeks. He'll probably be fighting for the lightweight title very soon. So keep the improvements of his game fresh in your mind and check that out. I think I called it Justin Geichi Learning the Hard Way on bloodyelbow.com. Otherwise, check out the Patreon. That's it. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, I think you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
Strong Connor.
Yeah. You like that sort of...
What's that? Slight moment of insecurity at the end. Just what people want to.
Yeah, the authoritative, the comforting presence of a true, tried and true podcast host.
Should have just gone for the breaking voice and like, you can come back next time if you'd like.
Thanks for coming to Heavy Hands. Yeah.